I'm Patrick Marr. I'm up at Mount Sinai, New York City, and today we've assembled a fantastic panel of experts on this topic of social media in medicine and medical publishing. I wanted to thank them all in order. We'll start off with Jeremy Faust, and then the speakers after that are going to be Michael Gottlieb, Michael Gismondi, Lauren Westafer, and Ryan LaFollette. I guess we'll start off with Jeremy Faust. He is the head of the social media team for the Annals of Emergency Medicine. He's also the Foamcast podcast co-host and has been heading up the Brief 19 publications during the COVID pandemic. Jeremy, do you want to take us away?
Yeah, I do. I'm not sure. I think Lauren does the Annals social media, but that's okay. We take credit for each other's endeavors all the time. So it's great to be here. So wait, am I going to do my slides right now, like my little share screen now, or should I?
Yeah, if you'd like to start off with your slides, and then we'll
go. Sure. Let me make sure that I tried this before, and now of course I can't find it. This is the beautiful thing about. Oh, here we go. I think this is going to work.
Great.
Wait, is that true? Yes, that's working, right?
Yeah, looks good.
It looks okay. All right, cool. So I'm supposed to cover, and I'm excited to cover, career advancement and promotion and networking with social media, which is something that I think I've done okay with. So the, let's see. Oh, wait. There you go. There's actually, this is like the one academic-y thing I'll say, like the one very like thing that this has been looked at is at Mayo Clinic a few years ago, this great article about the idea that social media could be about more than getting attention. It could be about more than just even just learning. It can actually be leveraged for your career advancement. And this was something that was shocking to me because I never thought that could happen. But I actually, there's a framework for this. This is being done. I know for a fact that, people have been promoted in part because of what they've been able to accomplish in social media medical education. And I think this was a good reminder of that. That's not why I got into it. I got in it to hang out with Lauren Westafer and to meet Lauren and become a work family spouse. And in fact, when Lauren and I started Foamcast in 2014, 7 years ago, literally, we had met like once in person or twice in person, it seems like, and over the years created hundreds of episodes and and then finally I've actually hung out in real life so many times. But when I think about like the formative sort of project of the early part of my career, it's been Foamcast, which is this medical education podcast that I started because Lauren and I met on Twitter, and we've learned a lot doing that. And I think, hopefully people have learned too, if not just learn to make fun of us for our shenanigans. But this to me, again, it probably never get me promoted or anything, but it's just been like such an important part of my life. So if nothing else, it's been great in that way. But also social media in a way brings you closer to people, even in your own milieu. The fact I trained at Mount Sinai in Elmhurst, and Scott Weingart was faculty there at the time. And so but there was dozens of faculty there. I mean, there's like 100 people that I worked with over the years. But why did I work with Scott? And the answer was because Scott was on his podcast and he was on social media. And so when Scott and I I was like, oh, we're local, but we're also in this sort of foam world. And so it was a natural collaboration. So in a funny way, people talk about social media as a way to branch out all around the world, but it actually found it helped me to branch out in my own neighborhood to find my people. And so that was really successful. And Scott and I have done a few things together. So that led to one of my first sort of academic papers, actually, was with this article we wrote. And then, of course, there's the overall project of, is being on social media a hot move when you are a resident? And I wrote an article in the Annals of Emergency Medicine about that. And ultimately, I think the answer 100% yes, but it certainly came with some pitfalls. Certainly that you get attention that's positive, you get attention that's negative, you bring upon yourself. But again, for the reasons that I think many of us know, you learn a lot, you meet a lot of people, and I think that it was a very worthwhile endeavor for me to do that. But I also want to say, in terms of just career advancement, that Twitter is where my cover letter was sent for my job. So if I did not send a cover letter to Jay Scher, I slid into his DMs. And, I think that's bold, but it was literally in a moment of frustration. I was looking for a job in New York. I really wanted to stay in New York, but I was just kind of like feeling punchy one day because I didn't have a contract and I had a few offers, and I just said, hey, Jay, are you hiring? And that was it. And next thing you know, Jay said, well, let's come up and talk and we'll hang out. You know, pre-COVID, you could actually come and meet someone in person. I'd met Jay a few times at meetings in person, but really it was through social media that he knew who I was and that I could do that. So I would say, like, did social media ever help me? I'm like, well, it depends. Does getting your dream job count? I'd say yes. So yeah, it's just people know who you are, you know who people are, and I think it's really effective. Then in terms of collaborations, there's collaborations with academic and non-academic. Again, social media helped me find my people. Even you go to a meeting and there's like thousands of people. Well, why did I know Megan Ranney? I was, well, because Megan was on Twitter and I was on Twitter. So that's why we became friends. And then so when over time the online collaboration became an in-person friendship, and then now we've done a few things together. So we've written articles together, and we do nonprofit work together. And then really, to me, the surprising turn this year has been this sort of idea of using social media as a place to foster collaborations for academic work. So I'm just going to show you like 4 papers that I wrote this year and point out how I know the people. So this is an article that I wrote in JAMA Internal Medicine with Carlos Del Rio. Carlos is an ID doctor at Emory. How do I know Carlos? Twitter. We were tweeting about the same things. I said, can I call you? And we talked, and it led to 2 manuscripts in JAMA imprints and a couple of op-eds. I mean, just literally because of Twitter. This next one was JAMA Network Open, and the senior author is Harlan Krumholtz. You know, I knew Harlan's work. Everyone knows Harlan's work if you're in the healthcare outcomes area. But honestly, it was just like, hey, we're tweeting about the same thing. I should call this guy. And so it led to academic work. Same thing happened with Rochelle Walensky on our JAMA article from December. I knew who Rochelle was just because she's the ID chief at Mass General across town, and we were on TV a couple times together. People always think, oh, is it worth going on doing this free television work? And I would say, yeah, because you never know who you're going to meet. I had just sort of seen Rochelle's tweets. She'd seen mine. We ended up on a segment together. And right afterwards, I emailed her and said, hey, I'm working on a project. Your expertise would be really helpful. Next thing you know, we were collaborating. But it was really just through the social media environment. And again, one more, Josh Neferatos is resident physician. You know, I met Josh on Twitter, probably found him annoying on Twitter for a while. And sometimes I still do love him, but you know, hey, whatever. But when COVID happened, we started working on some stuff together. And ultimately we wrote this little article and in BMJ. And then subsequently, Josh helped me start Brief 19. So, I mean, again, the collaborations that come from this milieu to me have just been huge. So my objective is supposed to be to talk about 3 ways that social media can increase the circulation of research findings. And I would say it's a 3-way cycle. So it's like you're sort of at the water cooler. We've all talked about the water cooler, right? This is where you find out things are happening. And so maybe you hear about an idea, you collaborate, and that leads to a publication. And that publication gets insane alt metrics because everyone's on Twitter and it's getting promoted. I mean, look at the alt metrics on some of these articles, and it's off the charts. And that's because everyone's on social media and people are retweeting it and they have media connections, and alt metrics actually leads to more citations. So, and then people, of course, see that work on Twitter and they get another idea and the collaboration starts again. And so that cycle goes. And so it's an interesting insight to see that when people are having in the right room together, the collaborations kind of happen in a cycle. So that's really been my experience, and it's been a good one. So that's it. That's my time. I hope I haven't gone over or gone under.
You're doing well.
And happy to answer any questions.
Great. I think I'll probably save questions until the end if that's okay, just because I know we've got so many people to give their expertise on this. Next up, I've got Michael Gottlieb, who's the Associate Social Media Editor for Academic Emergency Medicine. He's also the Incubator and Chief Academic Officer for Academic Life in Emergency Medicine. He is going to be talking to us a little bit about dissemination strategies and how modern journals have incorporated and embraced social media.
Awesome. Thanks. Always tough to follow. Jeremy, you did a really great job kind of highlighting why this matters, right? How you can utilize this. So I want to take it a step back and say, how do we actually get our research out there? One of the themes I heard as he was talking it through is, I know about these people because I saw their research out there. I saw their tweets, yes, but I saw it often in links to their research. So we're all doing studies, and how do we get it out there? Or we all have these competing demands, and there's constantly a push of, how do I decide what I need to read and what I don't? There's so many articles out there. There's no way I could possibly read all that in a given time. And back in the day, used to write an article, go into a journal, it'd get mailed out, and that was the option. That was pretty much all only way you disseminated outside people at your institution. That you drop the article on their desk or talk to them by it. But that advanced, right? Science advanced, knowledge advanced. There's emailed updates, there's social media, there's new ways of getting it out there. So the question is, how do we do that? Now, a lot of journals have social media editors that will help them to get their articles out from that standpoint. And I think a lot of the tools and techniques that these social media editors are using, we can incorporate ourselves to help get our research out there. Not for self-promotion, but because it's good research and other people need to see it and hear about it and learn about it, and because it advances the discussion and the idea of why we put this time into research, the idea of why we are subjecting patients to randomized controlled trials or educate or students and residencies educated to these studies to assess this is we want to advance the field, we want to improve knowledge. And that means that once we do it, it's got to get out there somehow. And one of the first things is to think about who your audience is. I know one of my internal kind of more novice errors was thinking that a tweet about an article is applicable to everyone, and it's not. The way we frame it is going to be different if we're targeting other authors, meaning we're trying to identify people that are potential collaborators. We're trying to target this maybe towards the public at large. If we're looking at this among clinicians for more just understanding how it applies in practice, the way that we're going to engage people, the way I'm going to put this research out there is going to differ based on our target audience. So we need to think about who are we really trying to target with this, this message, and frame our modality, frame our approach, frame our message to match our audience. One of the kind of initial and still somewhat tried and true models is the blogs and the podcasts. I don't see this as a way of just simply duplicating your work. The idea is that scientific articles are dry and it's hard for people to get through them. And they're written for researchers, which is valuable, but we have to be able to extend that and beyond. We have to think about how we can explain this in a way that people will get more depth, more context, more understanding to their practice. And that way they can actually apply it more in use. And so one of the examples that comes to mind is we look at podcasts. If we look at a lot of the journals, they've actually started putting together different podcasts for the given journal. So here's an example where Gita Pensa runs it for Academic Emergency Medicine and AEM/ENT. And so she did a podcast here talking with the lead author, discussing vaccination rates and acceptance among healthcare providers. And the idea here is, again, not to replicate what's in the paper, but to really add context, to add it beyond it, and actually hear from the lead author, because I think that's always so fascinating to hear their insights, what they learned. Some of the things they can talk about, whether it be from methodology or from actual practice, especially like this is an example where they're talking about how do we increase vaccination rates. That'd be really fascinating to get their insights on some of the things that may not have ended up in the paper. And I know that the vast majority of journals have started at least looking into this, and a lot of the ones in EM and medical education have active podcasts to help get that out there. And like anything with podcasts, there's often more of a need for content than there is a lack of it. So there's often an opportunity for you to maybe reach out and say, hey, I'd be interested in talking about this. Would you be interested in having this be on your podcast? Now, one of the major routes, we can't go through a talk like this without talking about Twitter, right? Just give it. And when we look at Twitter, I think it's like the extended version of articles in general. There's so many articles, but there's so many more tweets out there. And so knowing that there's just so many more tweets out there, it's easy to get lost in the shuffle of that. And I think the key here is to create your hook. What is it that's going to engage your audience? What is it going to get them interested to read your tweet over this thousands and thousands of tweets that are occurring simultaneously? And a few simple things: add a picture. Add a picture, ideally something relevant that ties into there. Like you can see on the left how Teresa Chan used an image here of the Gridlock game. So it's not just talking about games she created, it's showing what it actually looks like. Or on the right, maybe not everyone wants to look at a picture of an abscess, but linking it in here to like a roller coaster with loops on it might tie into this idea of the loop drainage. And again, it gets people more likely to read it than, for example, if you just post a copy of the abstract. And there's data to back this up. One study found that if you add images, you have an 18% greater chance of someone actually clicking the link, an 89% increased chance they're going to favorite it, and 150% chance or greater chance that they're going to retweet it. So if you have an image, it's more likely to be used. And then taking it a step further is infographics. I think many of us have seen this. It always seems overwhelming in the beginning as something that seems mythically hard to do. It's not. It's actually pretty easy with PowerPoint or Piktochart, and a lot of different journals actually have their own framework. So you can just kind of plug and play into an existing model. But there is data, again, showing that this is more likely to have someone actually read the article And it helps to translate our knowledge, because again, going back to the beginning, is that we want our information to get out there, and this is a way of ensuring people actually look at it. Finally, consider timing. You got to keep in mind that social media volumes vary across the day. The current data suggests that around 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. is the highest volume of tweets, and about 3 a.m. to 4 a.m. is when the tweets go down. There's also like a separate piece, which is engagement. So it's not just number of tweets, but how much people actually engage it. And that's about 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. and then about 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. So it kind of sits on both ends of those 9 to 5 jobs. Now, the trick is that's not medicine, especially emergency medicine. Our hours vary. So there is a little bit more variability there, and it may not be a perfect science, but we do need to be conscious of the fact that like Friday evenings, weekends, not surprisingly, have really low tweet volume. So if you want something to get out there, you might want to think about when you post, when you like, when you retweet, to try to hit those peak intervals so people are actually seeing it. All right, so let me summarize that. We know social media is a good tool to get information out there, but it can get lost in the shuffle. So you want to think about your message, identify your audience, target that to that audience. If you're going to use Twitter, try to include an image, an infographic, something to make it more visually appealing. And finally, think about the time of day. Remember that our readers are not going to read something in the middle of the night unless they're working that shift. And so if you really want it to be out there, think about the high volume times. So more likely people are actually going to see it. And with that, I'll pass along to Mike Gismondi.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much. And just as you said, Mike Gismondi is our next speaker. He's the Vice Chair of Education at Stanford Emergency Medicine. And he's going to be talking to us today a little bit about some altmetrics, some of these novel bibliometric tools that you can use to measure the effect and the impact of these studies that you're putting out. And Mike, if you're talking, we can't hear you right now.
There we go.
There you go.
After a year of a pandemic, I think I'd get the mute button right. Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here. And, you know, just as a preface, I work at an institution just like Jeremy's that probably has APT committees that really care very little, if at all, about social media. But I'm going to show you some tips and tricks on how you can still use social media to help advance your career in the professoriate. But first, I have to kind of tell a story. So out with the old. This is the old. So my research team of program directors is pictured here: Linda Regan, Hopkins, and Laura Hobson at Michigan, Jeremy Branzetti at NYU. We just published our 10th paper together, and we're very proud of ourselves. We meet every week, and we really enjoy talking about medical education research. We went to the AME meeting, the Association of Medical Educators in Europe, in Vienna 2 years ago. We presented a paper that we're extremely proud of. It took us about 2 years to get that qualitative paper done and published in a nice medical education journal called Medical Teacher. And you'll see that it has been cited a massive 4 times, and it has an impact factor that's not all that exciting. But I spent years of my life, blood, sweat, and tears on this paper. And I'm sure that you all have had that experience. So then in with the new. So if I had taken that same content and I repurposed it in whatever social media platform that you choose, and I would argue that all the platforms are just tools. You just have to pick the right tool for the job, right? You'd never hammer a screw and you'd use a screwdriver, right? So every platform has its use. But if I did the same thing, if I just published my material online as blogs that have large followings, weekly followings of subscribers, or podcasts with large subscriber bases, I would reach so many more people to scale than I would by putting it in an obscure medical education journal that probably most people on this call have never heard of. So there's some examples of this. We created a medical education podcast for Allium that focuses on the match called Emergency Medicine Match Advice. And in the first week, we launched it in 2014. It's interesting, Jeremy said 2014. There was a panel discussion with Michelle Lynn at SAM in Dallas in 2014 called From Twitter to Tenure. And I attended that panel because I hadn't had a Twitter account and I wanted tenure. So I thought it made good sense to me. So then we had coffee the next day and we came up with Match Advice. 3 months later, we had put our first podcast out. These are sort of reasonable numbers for the first week. And looking at it overall in the last couple of years, we're at 110,000 podcast listens for a pretty niche podcast. It's really for fourth year medical students going into emergency medicine. There's not that many of them out there. So, you know, we're getting a lot of attention for that. And because I'm in a place where the professoriate doesn't really value social media, I write papers about the things that I do online because they care about that. And Jeremy's smiling because he does the same. So it's a lot about your platform and getting your message out. And I think there's 3 ways to disseminate your research. These are my tips for you today. So first is to leverage altmetrics. The second is to blog about every publication. And the third is to amplify others. So leveraging altmetrics. What are altmetrics? Altmetrics are alternative metrics. They're a score that's scored to the paper itself, not to the author or to the journal as an impact factor. And it's calculated as you see here on the screen. And you know, certain altmetric scores are ranked, and there's percentiles, and you could get this sort of an article level metric for each of your papers. And you know, if you need to have that one important paper, they always tell us about this at Stanford, you need to have that one important paper to go up. This is the kind of metrics that you'll want to use. Now, author specific indices include the H index and the M factor. And the H index is calculated, as you see here on the screen, you have to have X number of publications cited the same number of times. So for instance, this graph shows a author who has an H index of 6. His 6 papers have each been cited 6 times. So what's good? A good H index is 20 at 20 years. And it's 40 at 20 years. You're going to get into like the Institute of Medicine. And 60 is truly exceptional. There are very, very few people that have that. The N value is the H index across many years. So these are markers that have become very important. How do you leverage them? Well, you need your papers cited. So I have old papers in random obscure medical education journals, and I want to increase my H index. Well, first I need to know what my H index is. So you could go to Google Scholar, you could go to Scopus, and you can, if you have a Gmail account, you can put my profile, and then you have all of your papers, and they're rank ordered by citation. It shows you your H index, and then you can kind of calculate, well, I have an H index of 17. So I need to go to article 18 and get that cited one more time. So that, or however many more times to get it to 18, I should say, to get my H index up. And, how do I do this? I blog every publication. So every publication gets a corresponding blog with a link, importantly, back to the main journal site, not to Web of Science or to PubMed. And this increases the likelihood that someone's going to read it. I have my own blog site, and this is where I blog about old papers that I think are oldies but goodies. As I get older, I miss those papers, and I just want them recirculated. And Allium does this with the Beyond the Abstract series. So for a little bit of reading after you leave the conference, I recommend this blog post from St. Elman's about research amplification and social media, and I will stop there.
Thank you. I love that. That was fantastic to hear. We'll keep moving along. Next up, I've got Lauren Westifer. She is, in addition to being the co-host of the Foamcast podcast, the chair of social media for the Annals of Emergency Medicine and on several editorial boards as well. And she is going to be talking to us some of the risks of social media reporting of research. So take it away. I think you might be muted as well.
Just don't get better at this, do we? Hey, y'all. I am here as the contrarian, which if you've met me in real life or seen me on Twitter, you know is just actually who I am as a person. So lovely to meet y'all. And what I'm going to do now is talk a little bit about the dark side. Twitter is great. It's how I've literally built my entire career, from probably getting a residency to getting a job and becoming even a researcher, an NIH-funded researcher. And so there is this dark side to it. And part of it is you get what you follow. And this is kind of good because you also follow people and then people push things to you, which is great because sometimes you did not know that you needed to learn more about tinnitus at this very moment, but that's what somebody tweeted an article on, which is great. But sometimes what happens is info gets pushed to you, but the same information gets pushed to you and pushed to you, pushed to you. A lot of critical care, a lot about oxygenation strategies, a lot about resuscitation, a lot about mindfulness. But sometimes it can neglect important topics. Like maybe you really haven't brushed up recently on preeclampsia, or general hypertension in pregnancy, or vaginal bleeding in pregnancy, or those sorts of things. So sometimes, depending on what you follow and who you follow, you may have these deficits that you haven't really seen, or you may miss really important papers just because they're not as fun to talk about. The other big risk here, and it's kind of related, is that you can create an echo chamber. You can get basically ideas and people that are just the same as you, people that agree with you. And even that, you even run the risk of that if you're trying to disseminate your own research, and you can sort of get it amplified in your own arena, but pushing out of that is maybe a little bit harder. Maybe you are, we'll just use an example, a pulmonary embolism researcher. So you may reach the emergency medicine clinicians, but you might not reach the internal medicine or the hospital or the outpatient medicine clinicians, which is where things might be beneficial depending on what it is you're trying to get out there. And lastly, importantly, quality control is really important. And it's something that can be variable on Twitter or other social media forums. And part of this is because, especially when you're looking at research and disseminating research, very few people are actually true experts at critical appraisal and methodology. The method section, there have been studies on this. They're getting increasingly complex. Our bar for what is good research, what are good methods, what is good, what are good data, this is increasing over time. If you look at a method section of papers in the 1960s, they were like 100 words, which would be laughable these days. And so it's really difficult to get really good at critically appraising studies, and few people actually sort of really probably meet this bar. There's also the risk in simplification. And on social media, by the nature of grabbing people's attention, wanting to be a little bit flashy, needing to be succinct, we have to simplify. That's one reason people go there, is they want a simplified stream of information, and they want things kind of spoon-fed to them. We know, we've already heard that infographics increase attention and traction of articles. That's why whenever you tweet, whenever you post something, put a graphic with it. It doesn't matter what it is. It can be literally a screenshot of the title. And they've studied this, and this is, I think, maybe the same article that was previously cited, 2.7 times increase in article visits. So that's the important metric here, is not how many impressions do you have, but how many people are actually going back and at least interested enough to take the risk and click on maybe actually reading the paper, and they'll get bored before they read the full text. Don't mind that. But this comes at a risk of oversimplification, because these graphics, they intentionally simplify things. They show you maybe the outcomes that are easy to represent graphically, or the ones that the authors represent, but may not really tell the full story. And you never see the method section really, which is like one of the most important parts of the paper, represented in infographics, because it's the part that people really don't want to see. So Twitter is great, and getting your research out on Twitter is really important, especially if you're a researcher helping people understand the methodology and what you did. There's a huge role for that here. And I think that as we look at people who are creating research and disseminating that out, it's really important to play a role in looking at what other people are putting out there and commenting on it. Because if you do have one of these expertises, whether it's in methodology, or maybe content expertise or research in one area, you can really be of value in contributing to these forums and helping pull other people from their echo chambers.
Great. Okay. And then we'll go to our last speaker. So thank you, Lauren. That was next speaker will be Ryan LaFollette. He is at the University of Cincinnati, and he is the editor of the Taming the Shrew podcast and also the assistant residency director there. And he's going to be talking to us about some of the ways that younger residents are being involved in the social media process and how they're using this for their education.
Thanks for that introduction. I sit at the end of this panel for a good reason. I am the outgoing chair of the Virtual Presence Committee of SAM, and am totally humbled by these people. So if Lauren was the negative, although that was the most positive negative presentation I've heard in some time, I want to offer the positive spin as somebody who is using social media really to define their career, and the ability to do that has been paved by the people on this panel. and as a testament to the ability to do it both on a local and a national level. I am very, very fortunate to be in an institution that does value FOAMed and online resources as educational content, and defined a lot of my promotional portfolio in the last year, and it is due to people validating it on the national level. From an education perspective, 3/4 of our learners are using podcasts, and there's been some recent data to show that that has as much retention as somebody sitting in a room and maintaining that content. So our learners are coming with the expectation that we will be able to articulate how to integrate these new resources. And so I am stand at the bridge to be able to hopefully help SAM find its niche in how to do that. I was just looking up, SAM and ASAP both have about 13,000 followers, and Ali Raja has 130,000 followers. And so the ability to translate our national societies into, I don't know how many of those are bots. I'm sorry, Jeremy. The ability to translate really a societal networking and dissemination strategy to the effect of the conversation that's able to be generated by the characters within emergency medicine and these panelists. I really think there's a large way to go there. So I'm incredibly humbled. Hopefully that is a positive spin on this panel, and happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Great. And with that, yeah, we've left ourselves a good amount of time for some Q&A. So hopefully those will filter in through the chat. I know that we got one that I saw right when this talk was going on. There was a question, whoever would like to address this, please do. If you have multiple roles besides a physician, so I assume this means, like, you know, if you've got an involved personal life, you know, wife, husband, mother, that seems like a lot that you'd be able to put out, and perhaps you maybe even have multiple Twitter accounts that you'd have to have for that. So what's your perspective on what do you share and what don't you share on your Twitter?
I imagine we all have differing opinions on this. I'm a purist, so on Twitter, I that's where I go for medical information. That's where I have my professional life. If I want to show pictures of my incredibly adorable children, either being ridiculous or wonderful, or, you know, anything about my wife or my personal life, that is relegated to other social media avenues, kind of separate. Occasionally there's overlap. For example, Jeremy and I, our families are friends. So sometimes there is that overlap there, again, demonstrating the social connectedness that you can, the networking that you can create. But that being said, I think that there is a role, because we have to be honest, there is that overlap. There recently I've become more involved in town forums on vaccine and pregnancy, vaccine for adolescents, as the schools create vaccine clinics for their middle schoolers and high schoolers. And so there is that overlap there. And so while I'm still like a purist and I still use that role and kind of disseminate even that stuff on Twitter that's I'm doing locally, I don't really blend that, just because for me, I don't really want to put my family out there. Also, I'm there to follow the medicine, not other people's personal lives, but that's just my take.
It's a good take. We had another question come in. A person who's mostly, she says, a Twitter consumer, but she wants to become a contributor, but also appreciates that there's a need to filter some of this, a lot of high yield foam content that's out there in the world. So she was interested in, you know, how do you efficiently filter your Twitter content? You have Twitter lists. I know that there's a lot of work that's been done within the foam community about ensuring that there's a lot of high, you know, that a lot of it has a little bit of review. So whoever would like to comment on that, kind of how do you filter it all in?
Well, maybe I can comment on the first sentence, and I'll leave the filtering part. You know, this issue of wanting to be a contributor, you can take the same material that Lauren or Mike puts out on Twitter and repackage it with your own take, your own lens, and that's called curation, right? It's what a curator does at a museum for us. They pick the nicest pieces, the most representative pieces. In this case, you know, it's your eye, it's your lens that you're viewing academic work. So one way that I would recommend doing this is when you read an interesting journal article, we all read our journal articles online now. When you read a great article, go to the journal's website, click on the how to share button. There's usually a little bird. You click on the bird, and then it pre-populates the tweet for you with that article, but you can put a couple sentences above that. That's your interpretation. Here's what I found that was really great in this article, or here's a question I have for you, #MedTwitter. And you start conversations. It's the information exchange that's the new goal, really, of social media. So you can be a contributor. You can be a contributor today. I would say also my one pitfall is to not contribute information about patients, right? I think even when we de-identify EKGs and X-rays, there's still HIPAA violations. So I would say stay on the side of journal articles rather than the interesting EKG you had from your shift today.
I mean, I share EKGs, and I know that it can be HIPAA violation depending on how it's done. There's a whole body of literature on that. I want to just jump back to the first question, because I am not like Lauren. I overshare, and part of that's because I can't resist, and also part of it's because it's intentional. At least I tell myself that. And the idea is that I want there's some degree of a public audience that I have, not just medical students, residents, and colleagues. Is I'm trying to like kind of bridge this gap between like the physician is sort of, old school, like distant figure, and someone who's real, who has passion, and who's seen as authentic. And one of the reasons we get outflanked by people who have a lot less medical information than we do, people in like the blogosphere who, are like putting out bad medical information, is they read as very authentic to people, and people like authenticity. And so for me, authentic is swearing because I'm pissed off about shit, so I have to do that. But there can, of course, be oversharing, and I think I've titrated it in both directions before. So I see there is some upside, and I just keep, Lauren and I have a Foamcast account, but that's just like get the Foamcast stuff out. But like I don't like have an account for like Jeremy's political thoughts and Jeremy's medical thoughts. It's just like one me. So that's that. I totally agree with what Mike said about the idea of like curation, and that's so important. And one question I have for the group is, 5, 6, 7 years ago, 10 years ago, it was pretty easy to find that. You just looked at FOAMed, #FOAMed. Now people will either not hashtag it at all, or they'll hashtag MedTwitter, which may not be everyone's cup of tea, because MedTwitter has a little bit broader of a sweep than FOAMed did. FOAMed was very much about medical education pearls. I mean, that was really how it was established, and it's faded, but it's still, when you hashtag FOAMed, that's what you get. MedTwitter is stuff that I find to be very important. I mean, equity, social justice, but it's not necessarily managing AFib. And so I kind of wonder if people have an idea of, if people just want to get the clinical stuff and they want to stay away from, how do you do that? Like in nowadays, with the fact that it's not just FOAMed anymore, what do people do?
That was a question, I think, to the rest of the panel that you're posing.
It is.
I've personally largely stayed away from MedTwitter, just in terms of what I actively follow, due to not the positive aspects that you mentioned, things about equity and things like that, because I do find a lot of that elsewhere as well, and by people that sort of get pushed to me. But because I have found and have seen a lot of people leave social media due to toxic types of conversation and vibes that come up, whether it's specialty bashing or whether it's much more sort of significant and severe. And there are good things, right? Like sometimes you can, there are instances of where articles that are sort of go viral for the right reasons. Like the article demonstrates incredible sexism or something like that. And people are like, come across it and find a fit, but then somehow that leads into personal attacks and things like that. And I've seen much more of that in that setting rather than like medical education. I'm here to learn. Obviously that's not all what it is, but as somebody who kind of wants the clinical information, wants to become a better clinician and things like that, for me, and to kind of maintain my sanity and trying to find the noise and the signal in that balance, I have personally intentionally neglected that sphere to some degree.
Okay. I feel like actually that kind of goes a little bit way to addressing this particular comment, which is somebody asked, what do you recommend for people who have sort of abandoned at least parts of social media for wellness purposes, and probably alluding to a lot of the negativity that you're referring to there, Lauren? How could you still use this to further your career, even if you weren't able to engage in it in the way that you'd fully like to?
So I can take that one. I think it's probably two pieces of it. One is setting time boundaries. It's really easy to get sucked in and have this just dominate your life. And I think just having some semblance of, this is the time I'm dedicating to being on Twitter, this is the time I'm not going to be on it, or whatever model works for you. Sometimes I like to respond to things right away and let it be off. I like to have focus time, but whatever works for your life, having it so it's not dominating it. It should only be like a small part of it, and being okay with taking time off. And I think the other one is something that Lauren had really well, which is think about your spheres, think about where you're being exposed to. If you're going down a path where it's just like bad comment, bad comment, bad comment, you're seeing the high rate of noise of really angry comments that just make you feel bad inside. And then there's like one little pearl of there, it's probably not worth it. And the ratio of the signal and noise and good to bad is not ideal. And so being okay with just, stepping out of that whole thread and just going somewhere else that's maybe more healthy for us. And so I think it's okay to like leaving spheres aside or picking and choosing when to enter it and when to step back. So we don't have to take the whole social media to be all encompassing and just pick the parts of it we want to do.
Mm-hmm. I'm really careful, like with comments. Now that I have like a few more followers, it's like I have to be careful not to read the comments or to expect this. Like I'll give you an example of what will happen on Med Twitter. I tweet, I like verapamil for SVT. And it's not just that I will get people saying they like adenosine. Someone's going to say, I guarantee it. They're going to say, my mother had an anaphylactic reaction to verapamil. It killed her. How dare you use verapamil? So, your choice of verapamil is making me feel unsafe. There's just lots of things that'll happen. I know that'll happen because people are very passionate. And so I know that's there and it's totally cool. And I don't feel the need to respond to it. I anticipate it as part of people's venting process, and it's cool. It's, it's all good. So, but I will say that you want more followers, but with more followers comes this potential for this need to like engage with the haters or the people who want to say something that's like negative. You don't need to.
One antidote to that is Jeremy has more than once been my reply. So he can see me visibly, whether we're sitting at a conference, I'm responding to a tweet or something, like having somebody I think recently he texted me because he saw me getting into a Twitter response that I should not have engaged with. But when it comes to LGBTQ issues, I'm very passionate about that. And so I started getting into it and he started texting me and I could tell he was trying to be my relief. So also trying to find somebody with that if, you're like, should I respond to this? Or if you have somebody in your life that can help you check with that before you kind of get in there, because not everything needs a response. Jeremy, in one instance, he's right.
Mm-hmm. There was an interesting question posed right now. Do you use Twitter analytics, and if so, how? I think that everyone or many people on this panel now have already referred to the number of followers that each other have, and it sounds like this is something that you do follow and that you do know when's the best time to post a tweet to make it go viral and to make this more advantageous to your research career. Can you go a little bit more into how that's being used?
I know I will I don't use it personally very much, but as a researcher and as the social media editor at Annals, I use it because I want to see what is getting traction and are people actually reading articles. And for example, I can spend a lot of time creating a visual abstract, but if I just take screenshots from the figures and have the right tags, or if the article is just fun enough, I will get the same sort of, I'll get the same sort of results back. So sometimes for less effort, I can actually get more just based on circumstance or timing or some of those other things. So I find it good to look at those things because also sometimes I'm just interested. I want to know how many people go back to the article, how many people actually zoom in and look at the thing. So sometimes some of those metrics can be rich if you're interested in how many people are actually looking or reading some of those things. I personally find those enlightening.
Actually, I've got my own follow-up question just to that. I was sort of interested. We've got a lot of people here who work for traditional journals, but as part of their social media team, how do they see social media as influencing what would have been at one point like a letter to the editor, the kind of feedback that you used to get to an article that you published, which used to come as part of a print publication, but now a lot of this critiquing, a lot of this kind of secondary peer review goes on a social media basis. There's a lot of things that would have previously been delayed and critiqued.
I've done it both ways. I've done some things where I just put it out there, and then other people, and then there have been times when we, it turned it into a letter. I also think that blogs are a really good place for these sort of letters to go. I think that, like, for example, the Surgisphere story was pretty important with hydroxychloroquine. Look, I mean, it was a lot, there were lengthy Twitter threads that essentially all but ended that publication for Lancet. Like, once that Twitter thread came out from those folks at Columbia, it was over. But I don't think that it necessarily would have worked unless they also had put it on their blog. So I think that social media and non-paywalled stuff is a great place for this stuff. Twitter, things can get lost. So it's a good place for conversations, but I do think that social media is a great place for that to work out, and it's pretty high yield, I think. Yeah. That's true. Surgisphere does sound like the evil James Bond company.
It's a great name for a company there. All right. Do you think that there's a delay in the acceptance of kind of the social media presence and how important that is from universities? When I was thinking about this question, I thought about the way that, if you were to publish a peer-reviewed article, you will definitely have an author affiliation, which includes the name of your university. But a lot of people in their social media accounts, explicitly will say that these opinions are not those of the place that you work. Partially, of course, to separate that from your social life. But, I was interested, when will this become accepted by more established institutions?
Sorry, what do you mean by, like,
well, actually, I guess alluding to things like a P&T. So, there still seems to be not the same kind of desire for, the place that you work to have a big social media presence for all their employees, for all their professors, as there would be for you to have a lot of traditional publications.
I think you just have to explain it, right? And you have to have meaningful data. I don't think that your number of Twitter followers, is a metric, though one could argue that it probably does measure dissemination or reach in some manner. But your APT committees are probably comprised of folks who have a Facebook account, maybe. I've never had a Facebook account, just as a point of order here on a social media panel. Never had one. Very proud of that. But they don't really know how the rest of the analytics work, right? So you have to kind of explain it a little bit. I think you also need to cite work on your CV that maybe isn't traditionally cited. So I have a digital scholarship section of my CV. I call it scholarship. Now, not all of it's peer reviewed, but there are editors for blog sites that could take my work down if it was truly horrific. And I write a lot for various blogs, and it's a pretty lengthy section of my CV. And in my long form, when I go up for promotion, and there's going to be a whole section on the use of digital media to support my my argument for reputation and how it was built. And I think you have to justify it for the committee and help them understand, just like you'd help them understand something about emergency medicine when the committee has no emergency physician on it, for instance.
Yeah, I agree. I think a couple pieces on there. One is just, you have to speak the language. They speak the language of, scholarship. You have to be able to lay it out. And so I'm going to throw in the chat in a second a paper by John Sherburne and a few others who define social media, it's social media or digital scholarship specifically, and criteria for that. So it brings it to the level they understand. And I think the other thing is, there's often like a view of social media as like, oh, there's this transient thing you do on the side, but it can be legitimate scholarship as long as you've demonstrated it. And a lot of times the dissemination of blog posts are much broader. And Mike's example was great, and how he kind of turned this like EM match into something that was seen by a massive number of people that would have been seen by much more than an article that came out there. And so I think understanding that dissemination has a much bigger impact sometimes than the citation metrics people are used to using, and learning to kind of put that out there and demonstrate in a way that's meaningful to them to see the impact.
Good. Okay, and I think we got that publication out there, yeah. Okay.
I noticed one thing about analytics. For the most part, it's just sort of random number generators, like how many people were online, was it a good tweet or not. But one thing I kind of noticed with Brief 19, which is this blog that I've been writing for a year, is I tweet out the articles every day pretty much. And I noticed something accidentally at one point, which was the more commentary I added to the link, the less people clicked the link. I was sort of like, damn, I suck. I just need to tweet the link and leave it alone. But maybe I was like, whatever, scooping myself, like, oh, they already read the top point from it, so they're not going to read the article. Whereas if you do something a little more emotional, like this is a really cool article by Josh Neferotis. This is a really hot take by Lauren Westhofer on pregnancy and vaccines. Just to tell people that you're emotionally interested in it, and then the headline is enough. I noticed that literally the less text I put, the more people are interested in the damn article, which is kind of funny. But that's what I'm trying to literally. I'm trying to drive clicks to the blog, because I think that people should read the blog. If your goal is to be commenting and kind of adding commentary, as Mike was talking about, to some article that came out, your goal is to get engagement, not to get clicks to an article or whatever. Your goal is to have a conversation. So it's more important that you have like 50 people actually engaging than it is to have 200 people click. So lower numbers could be more meaningful than a high number of people just clicking through and reading the article for 8 seconds and closing the window.
Jeremy describes a really nice way of amplifying your peers, right? This is a really great article by Ryan, and tweeting that out is, I think, very kind, and not done enough.
Great. I think we've addressed all the questions, unless the audience has any more. We are approaching.
There was one, hold on, there's one about the top 3 high yield Twitter habits, and I have none. I was curious what the other people have though. Do you see that comment?
I am not a prolific Twitter, but what I do is for some accounts that I run is I will sit down like sort of on I don't really have a scheduled day, but as a mostly weekend night person, my days that I have the fewest meetings are like Tuesdays. So I will sit down and I will schedule tweets for the following week in advance using their various scheduling softwares that you can use for free. And I will put those out so that I don't have to sit there and go through them. I wish I did this for my personal account, but I'm not that invested in my own uptake as I am for the organizations that I promote. So that's one thing that I do, because I'm just not on as much. I've got small children. They don't get screen time, and somehow they're still obsessed with the idea of a phone. So I try not to be like on my phone around them intentionally. And then at the end of the day, I'm too tired to be on my phone anyways, and I fall asleep. So I sit down on the computer, I schedule those out in advance, I attach the images to them, and then I don't really have to think about them. And then sporadically I will go through, I'll look through the mentions, the notifications, respond and do that. But I sort of lump work together at times that I can, because I just don't have the bandwidth to be on the way that a lot of the real Twitter superstars do.
The one thing I do like is bookmarks. Sometimes like you see an article you want to read badly, and it's like, what do you do with that? You can email it to yourself. You could send it to, what do you call it? Go Pocket or whatever. But I find the bookmarks are really helpful. The liking, people like too much. I like too much. I like everything. Mike says I had a good day. I like it. But I don't need to search that later, whereas bookmarks tend to be like, oh, these are articles I saw at 2 a.m. when I was getting a glass of water. Like, I'm gonna read that tomorrow, and I check my bookmarks.
Yeah, I'll echo on top of what Lauren said. I think using scheduling of tweets, and in general, I try to go by the idea that I don't let Twitter control me. I control when I'm going to use Twitter. So it's either whether it be scheduling out, whether it be I'm going to screen Twitter when I have nothing else I'm going to do, like back in the pre-COVID times when you could stand in line for coffee, or when I'm waiting for something. That's a really easy time because it's downtime, I'm not using anything else for that. So it's a much easier time for me to scroll than when I have 10 other things I have to do, and then I get dragged down a Twitter thread that eats up 15 minutes of my life that I can use for other things. So I try to select my times around the times that are not important for other things.
Okay. Anyone else, any high yield habits to share before we, conclude?
I mean, pick your desktop or your phone, but probably not both. Utilize standing in line at the grocery store as a meaningful time to tweet rather than dinner. So those sorts of time management tips are always helpful.
Good. Okay. Well, unless anyone has anything more to ask or more to chime in, I think that will conclude our session. Good. Thank you
for having us, Patrick.
I was really happy to have this talk put together, and thank you all for being such great experts.